afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. As always, on the fourth Wednesday of the month, it's our Bird Notes program, and I'm joined by Mark LaBarr, conservation biologist for Audubon, Vermont. It's great to see you, and you've brought along a friend.
I have indeed, Judy. It's always great to be here. Today I'm joined by Steve Hagenbu, who's a conservation biologist at Audubon and a longtime colleague of mine.
Well, welcome, Steve.
Great
to have you here.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
So now it's the middle of March, and of course we're in the middle of maple season, and the Green Mountain Audubon Center in Huntington does have a sugaring operation, and you've developed a new program, Steve, that has to do with birds and sugaring.
Yeah, and the Green Mountain Audubon Center operation is one that's been going on for quite a long time. It was a sugaring operation when we started as an Audubon Center back in the mid-1960s, and it had been sugared even before that. And we just in the last 2 weeks put out about 500 taps. We still do it a traditional way with buckets, and we do have a tractor and a trailer that we go around and gather that sap in. We still use a wood-fired evaporator, but we lack some of the technology that a lot of the big sugar houses have with reverse osmosis and vacuum systems that they can run on tubing. So it is very much focused on kind of a traditional way of doing things. And of course, though, we are a bird conservation organization, and so we've been looking for ways to bring birds into the conversation about maple sugaring here in Vermont.
I don't think people really realize that there is so much going on in the woods at this particular time. We still are in kind of winter mode. But can you tell me a little bit about some of the bird activity that you might see this time of year?
One of the things that I've been hearing is, and I've talked about this before, is the brown creeper, which I've kind of always considered a sugar bird because it is one of the first birds that we start to hear singing in and around the sugar woods at the Audubon. And I had one singing just the other day. So it's starting. It's not all that great. There's some other birds in there too.
Most of the bird activity during sugaring season is kind of the year-round resident birds we'd find. Our pileated woodpeckers, downy woodpeckers, black-capped chickadees, and things of that nature. And it's not really until after the sugaring season ends and the leaves start to return to the trees in the spring that the real bird activity really starts to pick up.
And so tell me a little bit about the importance of sugar bushes to birds.
Yeah, so a sugar bush is, it's essentially a forest that we've been managing for production of maple sap. And our forests here in Vermont in the Northeast have some of the greatest diversity of songbirds of anywhere else in the United States, which is something a lot of people don't realize. And certainly sugar bushes are a big part of that. And so what we've been trying to do is to think of a way to integrate that important role that forests play for our history here in Vermont and maple sugaring, but also for the birds that come here every spring from someplace like Mexico, South America, where they've spent the winter, and be able to really find a good habitat here for nesting and raising their young. So we came up with a project called the Bird Friendly Maple Project. And that's a partnership between Audubon, Vermont, the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation, and the Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association. So it's somewhat unique for Audubon in a conservation partnership to really get out there, promote maple sugaring in Vermont, but also the bird conservation value that those sugar bushes can provide.
Tell me a little bit about some of the specific birds that we're talking about.
Yeah, so some of the things that we might expect to find during in a sugar bush would be a bird like a black-throated blue warbler. And that's a bird that's going to be coming back in the springtime, usually sometime in May we'll start to find that bird in the forest. And one of the real key things that allows that bird to be in the forest, excuse me, and particularly in a sugar bush, is if we have a really well-developed understory layer of vegetation. So things like young trees, and forest shrubs that are actually growing in the forest, the next generation, if you will, of the sugar bush. That's a really important habitat aspect, enable for that bird to be able to nest there and find the food that it needs. And not all sugar bushes have that. It's something that sometimes gets cleaned out to allow for an easier access to run sap lines and things like that. So having that good, diverse understory layer is going to allow a bird like a black-throated blue warbler to be able to find the habitat that it needs.
And I actually had a black-throated blue down. I was in the Dominican Republic, and had them there. So that was a bird that was wintering down there.
Thank goodness you found it.
Well, I was keeping my eyes open. But again, as Steve mentioned, these are neotropical migrants that go back and forth. So it's important to have that habitat that they need on this end of their life cycle.
And this is a habitat that in some sugar bushes is being eliminated just because of ease of putting in tubing and working around the trees themselves?
Yeah, sometimes it is eliminated. Sometimes it's just where that forest in its developmental stage, it just hasn't developed yet. A lot of our forests here in Vermont are still pretty young by a forest standpoint, maybe 80 years to 100 years old. And a lot of times that understory just hasn't been able to develop yet. So some of the things that we can do in managing the forest can help promote that understory to grow again by using appropriate forest management techniques to allow that regeneration of trees to happen.
And so how important is it to have trees other than maples in a sugar bush?
That's a really important part, and it's one of the main messages that we're trying to get out through the Bird Friendly Maple Project, is that, you think about maple sugaring, certainly it's those sugar maples or red maples even that people want to be tapping, get sap from. But if we forget about the other trees that are part of that natural forest, and those may be things like yellow birch, eastern hemlock, American beech, those all have value in the forest, particularly from a bird standpoint. Different bird species tend to prefer different forest types. So whether it's softwoods or hardwoods, and some birds even have a specific association with the particular tree. For example, some of our songbirds that we focus on in the program are foraging for insects. And we know that yellow birch, one of those common trees in the forest, has a great diversity of insects, and so that's an important tree for birds to be able to go to and forage for. But beyond the bird habitat value of those added tree species diversity, there's also some great work out of the University of Vermont that looked at the value of that tree species diversity in helping to minimize insect pests and disease outbreaks in sugar bushes as well. And so the thresholds of how much non-maple should we have in the sugar bush in order to achieve that forest health standpoint also match up very well with helping to maintain a higher diversity of bird species.
And we just saw a picture there, our sugar woods down in Huntington. You see that hemlock branch that's right there, and it's we allow that stuff to remain in the forest and create that structure. And I think that scarlet tanager also came up on the screen, and that's another bird, a little bit more of a canopy bird, but still having that diversity in there of both the canopy and that mid structure, and then the different trees makes for a great sugar bush for birds.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is it just that sugar makers maybe aren't aware of some of the benefits of these other kinds of trees in the bush?
I think that there's part of that, and an educational component is certainly always an important thing to help get the word out to folks. And it's just tradition. Sometimes it's the way that we've done things for many years is what we continue to do. And, being able to look out through the sugar bush and see for a long way is something that traditionally has kind of been almost like a park-like setting. And so maintaining that form of management is just something that people tend to do because that's the way they've done it for a long time. So again, working with our partners and the Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association in particular, reaching out to their membership here in the state to help get some of these messages out there and what the values and benefits are of managing with birds in mind to the overall forest health and long-term sugaring capability of that forest.
And so what are some of the other things that we can find in a bird-friendly sugar bush? Yeah,
so in addition to having a good structure, again, that understory layer of young trees and shrubs growing, a diversity of trees in the overstory as well, while some of the things we'd look for would be finding large logs on the ground. And sometimes, sugar bushes have, compared to the forests that have been managed for timber products for a long time, have some of the biggest trees that we'll find in our forest because they've been sugared for a long time. And eventually those trees will die and they'll fall down on the ground and create these large, what we call coarse woody material that's lying on the ground. And there's a lot of insects in there that birds can feed on. It can provide some cover for birds to get into from predation. So there's lots of values to leaving that woody material, letting it accumulate in the forest floor and leaving it there.
It's also a great place. Those trees come down, as Steve mentioned. They create those gaps that we just saw. And, for some birds like ruffed grouse, they use that, pretty soon they'll be standing on those dead logs and they'll be drumming and starting that lawnmower noise that we hear in the woods. And again, those trees that are down leave these gaps an opening that allows sunlight in, and again, that structural diversity is increased.
And the gaps as well, one of the things in addition to allowing sunlight in is they also are places where one of our other sugar bush birds, the eastern wood pewee, which is a flycatcher, it's related to the phoebe that we have sometimes nesting under the eaves of our porch. And the eastern wood pewee, I call the forest cousin to it. They love to fly around in those openings, those gaps in the canopy, and search for insects that are flying around out there as well, because there's a lot of sun. Insects like to be where there's sun many times, so the flycatcher can fly out, grab it, come back to a branch and feed on it. So those gaps that tree falls down and makes that coarse woody material on the ground, now has also opened up a big hole in the canopy that allows better habitat, particularly feeding habitat for the eastern wood pewee.
And now I get to do, this is the fun part. What is that? What is the song of that bird, Steve?
The song of that bird. It's always great when birds say their name.
It is true.
The song of their name. So the eastern wood pewee basically says, "Pee-wee, Pee-wee.
Yeah.
It's the eastern wood pewee saying its name.
Yes.
So we'll be hearing that. That's somewhat of a later return to our forest, so not until maybe even early June will we start to hear that bird in the sugar bush.
It's always fun to try to do bird songs across the fence, just because,
no matter where you do it,
sometimes
it's
you
fun.
can pull it off, but sometimes, and you did a nice job.
Thanks.
You did a nice job.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, is there any way for people to know or find out whether or not sugar makers are getting this information and actually following some of these recommendations?
Yeah, so one of the things that Audubon has started to do just this past summer in particular is to do some technical assistance to interested sugar makers who would like to manage their forest in a more bird-friendly way. So Audubon staff can go out and do what we call habitat assessment and a forest inventory and kind of look at what the current condition of that forest is for forest songbirds in particular, and match that up with some of the criteria that we've established. I worked with the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation in particular to develop some guidelines for bird-friendly sugar bush management. So we can go out, do an inventory and assessment of that habitat, compare it to those standards, and then really just ask that sugar maker, through their management practices, try to fill any gaps that may exist between what the current condition is and what those guidelines say. So as a consumer, if we're interested in going out and looking to purchase syrup that was produced from a bird-friendly sugar bush, one of the things we're also working on right now is with a marketing firm right here in Burlington, Marketing Partners Incorporated, to develop a label. A bird-friendly label, and this is an example of the type of thing that we might be expecting to find, hopefully within the next year, is a sticker, a label on there that says it's produced from bird-friendly habitats. So a consumer will be able to see that and know what that means. We're also looking to develop some signage so that sugar makers themselves, if they're in the program, can have that at their sugar house and let visitors that come there know that they're actually intentionally doing things that's helping to enhance the habitat, in addition to producing sap, and hopefully for the long term.
And so tell me a little bit about what the reaction has been from some sugar makers. Are they pretty receptive to learning about this?
Sugar makers that I've met with so far have been very receptive to it. We've done a number of things over the past year to try to first kind of gain a sense of what that interest may be through some surveys through the Vermont Maple Sugar Makers Association. Also presented at the Vermont Maple conferences that were held back in January in 2 places in the state, and had a great response to both of those. From large and small producers. So we have people involved in a program that are at 30,000 taps, and we have people as small as 500 taps. So it really it's for anybody really who is interested in thinking about how they can integrate bird habitat into sap production in their sugar bush, and at the same time, in doing so, they're also helping to promote the long-term health and sustainability of that sugar bush as well. So it's not mutually exclusive to sap or birds. It's really the overall forest and the forest health that we're talking about.
And so that sounds like a great project. Really interesting stuff. We also should let our viewers know that you're having a Sugar on Snow party this weekend. Tell us a little bit about that, Mark.
Well, the Sugar on Snow party, folks in Vermont, it's funny because outside of Vermont you mentioned sugar on snow and people look at you quizzically, and when you throw the pickle piece in, the sugar on snow with the pickle, that raises eyebrows. We've been having our Sugar on Snow parties at the Green Mountain Audubon Center for the past 3 decades. Bob Spear, a long time. Yes, Bob Spear was one of the first ones to start that. So we're going to have our annual Sugar on Snow parties on the 28th and 29th. That's the open house weekend.
Yep, it's the Vermont statewide open house, Maple Open House weekend as well.
So, and folks can come down and they will have the sugar house running. Hopefully the sap we can be gathering, and we'll be doing some educational demonstrations. Steve will be there to talk about the sugar woods, and other biologists will be there to talk about this project and how we manage effectively for birds in our sugar woods. And then, of course, there's Sugar on Snow to purchase, and donuts and things of that nature, and that all goes to support the educational programs that we do at the Audubon.
Well, if you'd like more information about the Bird-Friendly Maple Project, you can contact Audubon Vermont at 255 Sherman Hollow Road in Huntington. That zip code is 05462. You can also email Mark and he'll share with Steve. Mark's email is mlabarr@audubon.org. And don't forget to send Mark your bird-related questions. He'll try to find the answers for you in an upcoming edition of Bird Notes. We have a few seconds left. What should people be looking at now with birds coming in?
Well, it's interesting because we've heard reports of song sparrows back, and then the big one is red-winged blackbirds
Right.
too.
Have people been seeing those yet?
They have,
Oh, good.
yes, yes. So that's the first kind of sign.
Slow trickle in.
Yes, and then your bluebirds should be returning sometime soon too, if they're not already back.
I haven't seen them yet, but I'll keep my eyes
Yeah,
open.
it's soon. They'll
Thanks
be
to
back.
both of you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.